The shotgun, the ultimate survival weapon. Why it is so good, so versatile, and so maligned and neglected and overlooked in today's firearms world. That is what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, use of force, the right way with God at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. On that experience, see the bullet points in the show notes: military, law enforcement, private security contracting, competition shooting, hunting. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Now let's get into it. Let's talk about shotguns. Shotguns are so versatile and so, I think, taken for granted because I think a lot of today's gun industry is pushed by social media. Now here's a little tactical tip / lifestyle design tip. Just get off social media. I've been fasting social media for quite a long time now. I don't have TV. I haven't had that for a long time. I thought I've got a podcast I should get on social media and stuff, and I've gotten rid of that too. If you want a better life, get off of social media. But even if you don't want to permanently, give it a shot for a month or so and stop, being pushed and treated like a simp for stuff you don't need. Now, if you just like the next latest and greatest stuff, if you're just like, this new rifle round is 20 feet per second faster than one that's been around 100 years, I must have it today, and I must have it in black multicam, and I must spend $1,200 on a $20 tube to screw on the end of my rifle. I must have it. Cool, man. It's yay capitalism. Spend that money. But what's probably more practical for most people for most things is a decent, $300 to $500 shotgun in 12 or 20 gauge with an assortment of shells. Besides EDC, besides like on a battlefield, nothing rivals the versatility of a shotgun. Nothing can go from taking out a grizzly bear to a quail with the same gun on the same day. Whereas you can stop the grizzly bear with the appropriate ammo, of course, like a solid Bernanke slug, to taking a quail out of the air and being able to eat it. Meanwhile, being a fantastic choice for defensive use. I've told this story before, forgive me, but I worked L.A.P.D. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I worked fugitive recovery. And I worked other places and did other things that I'm not going to get into where I had access to an entire arsenal. I'm talking submachine guns, literal machine guns, stuff that would make most people drool. But when it came to kicking down a door where somebody might want to kill me on the other side, probably the most common thing that I grabbed, not for everything, sometimes I would grab, a machine gun. But most of the time, I grabbed a Remington 870 with buckshot, because that was the best tool in the job. I didn't care what was going to look cool while I was taking a selfie on Instagram. I cared about what was going to get me breathing when I got to the other side of that house. And as cool as the other stuff is, what's really cool? Not bleeding out in some filthy meth house. That's pretty cool. When it comes down to it, the shotgun is a fantastic choice for many, many things. I'm not saying not to have other things. I have an AR behind me right now. I'm outside of work, trying to get some recording done. If you guys don't know, I work full-time as a private security contractor. Going to and from work, I like to have a truck gun. Now, I have an AR behind me in the vehicle, but guess what I also have? Remington 870 with an assortment of ammo. Why? Because for some things, the AR is fantastic. For a fighting rifle, for an intermediate cartridge, fighting rifle, it's fantastic. But for many other things, the shotgun's just a better tool, even though it's simple. Mine's an old Wingmaster Police before they had the Police Magnum. They had the Wingmaster. Mine's one of those old ones. Back when Remington made good shotguns. I wouldn't recommend a new 870 today. Maybe we'll get into really good platforms today, but it's fantastic. And getting back to, truck guns, vehicle guns, trunk guns, however you want to, whatever nomenclature you want to assign to that, whatever vernacular you want to use, there's a reason it's called riding shotgun. Because even going back to the old stagecoach days, a shotgun's a pretty good tool for highway robbery, for defense on the road, for, supplementing some protein on a long trip, whatever it is. A shotgun is fantastic for that. I've said before, if I could only have one long gun for the rest of my life, no caveats, not like, the Cuban, North Korean, Russian paratrooper army is coming down right now. Like, you give me enough specifics, I could pick a very specific gun, but you say no caveats. The world as we know it is ending soon. The peanut butter and chocolate is hitting the fan. The balloon is going up with cherry on top. Whatever vernacular you want to use for that, you can only have one long gun. And this is not a situation I want to be in, but it's good to have these thought experiments so we can see what we'd actually take, not what's cool on Instagram or YouTube, whatever the gun tubers are pushing this week. But I would pick a shotgun with no other caveats. As you might imagine with my bio, I've been blessed to live through some nasty situations. I've been in some violent armed encounters. I've been to war. I've worked some of the nastiest streets in the country. And I've been in some violent encounters. And even if you put me in a far more violent place than even, a war zone, the number of those, if you multiplied it by 10, would pale in comparison to the amount of times in my life I've had to eat. I say again, they pale in comparison to the amount of times I've had to eat. When it comes to eating, nothing rivals the shotgun. You can get stuff that's better for almost anything for a specific thing. Like I just punched my elk tag last week by God's grace. Did it with a rifle, centerfire rifle. But guess what? The year before that, I did it with a shotgun, with a slug. I got my elk with a 12 gauge with a slug. Is it as good for elk hunting? No, it's not. But it's decent for elk hunting in reasonable ranges, and it's also good for bird hunting, for grouse hunting. You get the idea. As a poor boy growing up in the South, putting food on the table, and if I'm being honest, poaching. Back then I would just call it eating, because we were poor and, running around the woods with a cheap, beat-up old bolt-action 410 shotgun, and then later a single-shot 20 gauge, and then after that a pump-action 12 gauge or semi-auto 12 gauge. Deer, squirrel, duck, geese. The shotgun. The shotgun did it all. Shotgun still can do it all. And I've done an entire series on shotgun ammo. If you count them as a series, I've done ones on a whole episode on slugs, on buckshot, on different shotgun ammo. But here is the deal. The ammo selection of the shotgun is what makes it so versatile. It's what makes it, if I could only have one long gun with no caveats, it would be the shotgun. Because I can load it up with birdshot for birds. Yes, birdshot for birds. Not for self-defense, not for home defense. Stop it with that. It's a horrible advice. I have seen the results of birdshot on people at very close range. It's for birds. It's not for people. Birdshot is for birds. Buckshot is for buck and buck-sized things like people. But anyway, birdshot. And there's a huge swath of birdshot. Quick lesson here. The bigger the number, the smaller the shot. It's the inverse relationship. Just like with gauge. Inverse relationship, but like number 9 shot for mourning doves at close range over dogs or something. Or quail over dogs would probably be a better analogy. You generally don't hunt. You generally don't spook up doves with dogs. You generally use the dogs to retrieve doves after they fly over, and usually spook quail with dogs. But very close range quail with dogs, 9-shot. 7.5 shot, a good all-around. If you're just all-around birder, don't really know what you're going to encounter, birds and other small game, 7.5 shot is cheap, it's available. Number 6 shot is probably your best, let's call it medium small game, big grouse. If you're in a survival situation and steel shot laws don't matter, before steel shot came about, it was real popular for ducks and squirrel, rabbit, things like that. Number 6 shot is a fantastic thing to have around. For turkey as well, turkey's a much bigger bird, but you generally aim for the head. So 6 shot would work there as well. And you move up into bigger stuff. There's all the buck shots. The standard is double up buck, double up buck. But I would argue there are some better ones for a lot of people for a lot of things. One of my favorites is number 4 buck. I've shot both deer and bear with number 4 buck. I like number 4 buck. The reason being your standard vanilla double up buck load is 9 pellets of double up buck and a 2 3/4 inch shell, and a 3-inch 12 gauge. You're going up to a whopping 12 pellets of double up buck. With number 4 buck, standard is 27 pellets, and the 3-inch Magnum is 41 pellets. Now you're moving down, if memory serves correct, from 33 caliber to 24 caliber, but 24 caliber lead ball is nothing to sneeze at 1,400 feet a second-ish, and you're getting 27 to 41 of those. It's not really important how big the hole is. It's important that the projectile hits something vital, and you got a lot more chance of that with 41 than with 12. Not the best for everything. Each one of those double up pellets is going to carry more energy per pellet. You're just getting a lot less of them. But anyway, number 4, getting off on a tangent there. If we get out from rabbit holes like that, we'll never recover. But number 4 buck, double up buck. Number 1 buck is a really good kind of forgotten about buckshot size. It gives you a good balance between the two. Triple aught is kind of more of a specialty kind of thing if you're specifically going out to hunt bear, elk, something like that with buckshot. It's or even whitetail deer, and you're going to go at longer ranges. But anyway, buckshot for that, and buckshot's also fantastic for defense. I'm a big fan of number 4, but generally for most things, especially if it's issued military and law enforcement, you're dealing with double up buck, which is still fantastic. One of the things people often say is like, the shotgun, it only has 5 rounds to 9 rounds, 13 rounds on tap, and the AR's got 30. Man, I'm all for you not being infringed. If you want a 60-round double stack mag in your AR, rock on. But it's probably superfluous for practical things. If you just want to make noise and turn money into noise, cool. If you just want to have one, cool. I don't think anybody should infringe on that. But here's the deal. Think of any number of likely scenarios besides the Cuban, Russian, North Korean paratrooping zombies with trained, squirrels with rabies jumping out of the sky. Aside from that, what practical situation can you not solve with, let's take a good medium, 7 rounds of buckshot and slugs in a defensive situation? Like, double taps are a thing with ARs. You learn hammered pairs, you learn controlled pairs. I'm all for it with an AR, and sometimes an AR is the right answer. But double taps aren't a thing with double up buck. There is no need for a double tap with any kind of decent hit. There just isn't. You can get decent hits with 223, 5.56, and you might need several hits. I'm not aware of any where somebody got a good, anywhere close to center of mass hit with double up buck where that wasn't a fight stopper. It just, what scenario are you looking at where 7 rounds of double up buck and or slugs, combination thereof, is not sufficient? So yeah, you do give up some capacity. And again, there are situations where I want a fighting rifle, a battlefield being one of them. But the shotgun for most things, again, if I don't care about what's cool and I just want to get the job done, oftentimes, a big chunk of the time, a shotgun is the right answer for that. There are many other gauges, but 20 gauge and 12 gauge being the two big ones. I generally run 12 gauge just because I'm so familiar with it and because it's the most common and the most affordable. But honestly, especially if you live east of, let's say, the Mississippi River, there's nothing you can't do with a 20 gauge rather. I said it was an inverse relationship. If you don't know, the number of lead balls the size of the barrel that equal a pound, that's your gauge. 20 round lead balls in a 20 gauge equals a pound. 12 and a 12 gauge equals a pound. A 12 gauge is bigger. A 20 gauge is plenty big enough. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking that a 20 gauge is always going to have less recoil. You could find 12 gauge loads and 20 gauge loads that have the same payload at the same velocity. So, really isn't going to matter there. Plus, many 20 gauges are lighter, which in many cases, especially for hunting, is a huge advantage. But if you get a lighter gun, you may end up having equal or more recoil. So don't just assume that the 20 gauge has less recoil. A main reason for the 20 gauge, going back to the lighter, the ammo is smaller and lighter, and the platform itself is smaller and lighter. Now, one of the big criticisms for survival is that the ammo is heavy. And roger that, the ammo is heavy. One of the reasons, and again, if you put caveats in there, there's times when I would choose a 22 long rifle for my one long gun. If you gave me enough caveats, like I was stuck behind the Iron Curtain somewhere east of the Mississippi and I wanted to actually live, I would probably try and get out west, out of the people hive, and I had to walk 500 miles on foot. Yeah, I'm probably going to take a 22 because I can carry a lot more ammo. I could likely carry all the ammo I'd ever need in my backpack for the rest of my life with a 22 long rifle. I'm not doing that with a shotgun. But the shotgun is way more versatile. Again, getting back to that versatility. Do you give up some range? Yeah, but I mean, with just I'm not even talking a rifled specialty shotgun, a smooth bore shotgun. If you don't just not sight in your shotgun, like you would never do this with a rifle. I hope not. You would not just like buy a rifle and then buy some random Walmart ammo and go out and shoot at a deer and be like, oh, it's not accurate. Did you zero it? Like factory zero, that's not a thing, dude. If you actually get your shotgun with sights, which maybe I'll get to later, but actual sights, not a bead, not a rib, but actual fighting sights and or an optic, and you try different loads and get it zeroed for that load, a decent smoothbore shotgun is a 150-yard weapon. Took my elk last year at a pretty long range. At 150 yards, a football field and a half, when you think of that as short range today, look at most CONUS, continental United States, regular America stuff that happens or could possibly happen, especially in an environment that most people live in. I'm looking around right now, I'd be hard-pressed to see more than 150 yards. So, yeah, you do give up some range, that's real, but you gain a lot of versatility. I touched briefly on buckshot slugs. The main ones in America are the Foster slug. They're good for most things. If you want a little bit beefier, more penetration, we talked about like grizzly bear. They do reside in the state that I live in. Big things like that. You might want to go to a Bernanke slug, or if you're trying to, stop a vehicle. Bernanke slug may be the right answer for that. It's a slightly different design. It's generally more solid, better at penetration. And I'm not going to get off into specialty shotguns like rifled shotguns because you're doing that because of legislation. It's not a versatile weapon. You're basically turning a shotgun into an 1850s rifled musket. And you're probably doing that because your state requires it or something. But if you're putting on a rifle barrel on your shotgun, you're getting rid of a ton of versatility. So Foster slugs, Bernanke slugs, generally an ounce, give or take a quarter of an ounce. Maybe a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit heavier, but generally an ounce range for a 12 gauge at right around 1,600 feet a second. That is a lot of energy. That is a lot of stopping power. A 1 ounce slug at 1,600 feet a second. Recently did a thing, and I've done a whole series on this as well on truck guns, but I recently did one on 50 state legal truck rifles. And I briefly went over, we're not talking about shotguns today. Well, right now we are. You have to go through all kinds of things and considerations on if you're going to travel through restricted areas and stuff with rifles. Most modern rifles are illegal in many big states like California, like a standard AR-15, or Massachusetts. But most shotguns are legal. You get all that versatility we talked about, all that good for defense, all that good for hunting, good for a variety of situations. But a lot of people overlook them because they're legal everywhere. It's like when you're told you can't have something, you're like, oh, but now I want it because you said I can't have it. Again, I'm not for restriction, but don't be bamboozled into thinking because they all lose their minds over black rifles, vintage 1950s AR-15 technology, because that's what they're going after. That's what's best for you. Oftentimes, for a vehicle gun, for a truck gun, a shotgun is a better choice. You get one with a reasonable rate of fire, a pump or a semi-auto, and it's a better, more logical choice. And, the fact that they're pretty much 50 state legal and nobody's trying to ban them, have at it, man. I live in a state that borders Canada. Like, when I go to Canada, guess what I bring? 12 gauge. Pump shotgun. Is the paperwork a pain in the butt? Yeah, it is, but it's better than being unarmed. In case I run into the Maple Mafia up there. But you get it. Even going to Canada, they're illegal. But because they're overlooked by the media, because they don't maybe look as cool in a movie, because you don't got a bunch of people screwing $1,200 titanium suppressors on them on Instagram, that they're just not as coveted. But again, you know what's cool? Not dying. You know what's cool? Being able to feed yourself and your family, putting food on the table. And the shotgun is really good for all of that. Now, reasonable rate of fire, bolt actions are kind of a vintage thing. I grew up with one. They're kind of nostalgic. But really today, we're talking about pumps and semi-autos. Either one of those. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. But for the advantage of cost, there are some cheap semi-autos, and there are some really good semi-autos, but you got to pick one. There are no cheap, good semi-autos. No, not the Turk Nasties that look like a Benelli, but they're made in Turkey. If Benelli's a fine shotgun, my favorite semi-auto. If you want a semi-auto, get a Benelli or get a Beretta, but they're not cheap. You can get several decent new or used pump shotguns very affordably, and no, not the Chinese or Turkish clone of a good gun that looks like a good gun that costs $100, like an actually decent American-made one that's $300 to $500. That's a phenomenal value. Just the easy one to recommend is a Mossberg 500 or that whole family. The 590, the Maverick 88, which is still made in America, which is still a fantastic gun. They're like $200. Are you kidding me? With all that versatility we talked about? The Benelli Nova is often overlooked. It's a Benelli, but it's not nearly as expensive as a semi-auto Benelli. They're a good value. And they do have that Benelli quality. They're fantastic guns. And there are plenty of other used pump shotguns that are affordable. I would say if you want the versatility, get one that takes chokes, not one of the old ones. Like most of the old shotguns are like full choked. You don't want that. It's not the most versatile choke. You probably don't want a full choke unless it's a specialty gun. And you probably don't want a cylinder bore unless you're just kicking down doors. You probably want improved cylinder, which is my personal favorite for all around, or a modified. And you could fight it out over those two. It's kind of like arguing 115 grain 9mm versus 124 grain 9mm. You're getting into minutia at that point. But either an improved cylinder or modified, you might think full is better. More is not always better. You could duke it out between improved cylinder and modified, but in my opinion, you want a very versatile shotgun. Make it live with improved cylinder or modified, whatever pattern is best in your gun for your common situations. And often things like slugs and buckshot will work better out of a pattern, group better out of improved cylinder or modified than they will out of a full. But get one with interchangeable chokes. Getting back to that versatility, you want one with chokes. Most modern shotguns, and by modern I'm talking this goes back decades, will have interchangeable chokes. Wind choke, rem choke, the Mossberg pattern. There are several different patterns, but just screw in chokes. It adds to the versatility of that shotgun. I'm going to buck the tactical trend here and say for a survival shotgun, you neither want just, one with a bead on it, unless, again, you're just kicking down doors. If you're just shooting at arm's length, a bead, whatever. It's just a reference point. But if you actually think you might shoot outside of a room distance, you probably don't want a bead. And you probably don't want a rib. A rib is great for a sporting shotgun. You say you just talked about hunting. Yeah, but sport hunting. Sport hunting is meant to be sporting. If I'm trying to feed myself, I could give 2 craps about sporting. I want meat. Which means I'm probably not going to shoot something out of the air if I can shoot it on the ground. If you want to be sporting, let the duck fly through the air and pluck it out of the air. That's beautiful. If I'm trying to feed myself, I'm probably going to wait for the ducks to land and wait for 2 or 3 of them to be lined up together and try and get multiple with one shot. That just makes the most sense if I'm trying to survive. And for that, aiming. Yeah, a rib is great if you're shooting moving targets out of the air. And if you're buying a sporting shotgun, a rib is great. But again, bucking the trend, you probably don't want just a bead, and you probably don't want a ventilated rib. Those have their place, but not this place, not for a general all-purpose survival shotgun. I'm going to tell you get one with rifle sights. Not a rifled barrel, but rifle sights, a smoothbore barrel with rifled sights. Companies made these for a long time. They still do make them, but rifled sights, meaning like AK-47 style sights, the older Remington 700 style sights, a decent sight picture. Also very good and common today are ghost ring sights. I actually like the old rifle sights better, but ghost ring sights are common and they're a decent choice. If you want the ability to mount an optic, I'm going to tell you what I would tell you on a fighting rifle or survival rifle. Have backup iron sights. Don't just get one that puts a red dot on it and trust your life to something with batteries. If you want to put a red dot on it, cool, but have a way to take it off quickly and easily so when the batteries die, you still have a working shotgun. Don't get something that only takes an optic. Get something that has good sights that you can also have an optic on. Man, shotguns, I just realized how long I've been talking. Shotguns are a complex topic. We could nerd out on all kinds of rabbit holes on the shotgun, and we probably have in the past, but don't overlook the shotgun because it's not being pushed on you, because it's not being marketed, because it's whatever. And don't think you need the latest and greatest one in multicam. If you want it, that's great. And if you want to try the latest and greatest shotgun, fantastic. But there's some really good, affordable utilitarian shotguns out there. The versatility mostly lies in the ammunition. So get a variety of ammunition, know what it does, know how it shoots out of your gun. Have a good loadout for it if you're actually going to use it and carry it or have it as a vehicle gun. And train with it. And you will have a very versatile, very affordable, very utilitarian weapon. Even if it's not going to get you a bunch of middle-aged dudes, drooling over it on Instagram, if that's your thing. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Thanks for listening. Your tactical tip of the day: if you find yourself needing a slug and all you have is a bird shot, what is a survivalist to do? Well, there's 2 main ways you can do this. The one on the fly is to make a cut shell. It's where you cut around where the wad is. It's not as good as a slug, but it's much better than birdshot if you need it for something you need a slug for. The solution is to have the proper slug, but if you don't and all you have is birdshot and you need a slug, it can be done hastily if you know what you're doing. And I would encourage you to know what you're doing. If you hurt yourself or somebody else, it's your fault, not mine. I know I missed my calling as a lawyer. But there's the cut shell slug, and then there's the wax slug, which you just open up the front of the shell and you pour in wax to keep the pellets together, whatever size they are. So they're basically one monolithic chunk of like caviar until they hit the target, and then they will disperse. It's a decent solution, again, if all you have is birdshot and you want something more like a slug. It's not as good as a slug, but more like a slug. Wax slugs and cut shells. So that's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. Now, we talked about eating. We talked about survival. Famine has been a major killer in times past, and food has been used as a major weapon in time past and a means of power in times past. I was brushing up this morning on the story of Joseph. So, in keeping with that, let's go to the book of Genesis. Let's look at some of that here. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, because the Egyptians, each one, sold his field, for the famine overcame them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. He made the people slaves from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Think about that. And have a blessed day.